Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today with Casimir. Casimir will be discussing ARISE, which is a remote study to evaluate the performance of their novel Duchenne Video Assessment tool. I'm Eric Camino. I'm PPMD's Vice President of Research and Clinical Innovation. I'm joined today on this webinar by Mindy Leffler, the President of Casimir, and Amber Sapp, the Lead Physical Therapist for Casimir. As a reminder, there will be an open question and answer session at the end of the talk. So if you do have any questions, please submit them into the chat and we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to PPMD's website. So please feel free to share with any friends or family if they were unable to see the webinar. And then I think with that, we're ready to get started. So Amber, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Eric. As Eric said, my name is Amber Sapp. I'm the lead physical therapist for Casimir. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself and my family, kind of our experience with clinical trials. That's me on the left. That's my son, Garrett. He's 16. He has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We noticed when he was about 3 years old, he was having some gross motor delays, struggling a little bit to get up steps. And, you know, I sort of watched how he moved around all the time. He's my first child, so there's kind of that first time mom worries, is he developing appropriately? The physical therapist in me sort of watches every move. And I had seen him get up off the floor the same way for, you know, a year or so. And it hit me one day that what I'd been watching was the Gowers Maneuver. And I think most of you are probably familiar with that, where the kids struggle to get up off the floor, so they sort of push themselves up with their thighs to stand. So I called the pediatrician and said, hey, I really need you to do a CK test. And he kind of really dismissed me as being a first-time mom, and this is not something you should worry about, and really pushed him on it. And so we had that done, and he calls the next day and says, yeah, you know, his CK is well over 10,000. And I knew then that we were dealing with Duchenne. It's a little weighty, being a physical therapist and a mom who has to make that diagnosis. But I called all the right people immediately, or so I thought. We waited, you know, about 4 months to get into a specialist. Felt like forever at the time, just thinking, you know, I just need somebody to help my kid, just see my kid, tell us what we should be doing. And I remember that visit really distinctly. We went into the neurologist's office, and he comes in and he's got this bow tie on that you just can't ever forget. And he's got this big black doctor's bag that's beat up. And he reaches down in his big black bag and he pulls out this pink rubber ball, and he bounces it in the room and watches how my 3-year-old son moves around to chase this ball. And he not one time put a hand on him. He did not do a physical exam or reassure us that things are going to be okay. And he told us the same message that he's told, you know, these neurologists tell a lot of these families. And he literally said, there's nothing that we can do for him. Just take him home and love him. So one of the first things we did after we found a new neurologist was to really put our eye toward clinical trials. So, you know, currently, if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see something like, you know, 70 trials or so that are recruiting for Duchenne. But 13 years ago, that was not the case at all. Garrett has a single base pair deletion of exon 21, which is kind of the rare within the rare. And so there are really, back then, and even still today, there are really no disease-modifying treatments that are being studied for him. We did search for a trial that could potentially help him many years ago, found one that we were agreeable to. It involved a 2-year commitment where we traveled to a clinical site once a month for an IV. It required us to have IVs in each arm, so you know what comes with that. These guys seem to be like super hard sticks to get venous access. We actually had the option to do the study close to our home, but when I found out that Dr. Bowtie was in charge of it, we decided to drive 6 hours to clinic once a month. We missed a lot of school. We slept in a lot of hotels. We ate a lot of fast food. Garrett was asked to perform a lot of assessments on very little sleep, sometimes even on an empty stomach because he had fasting labs before, always away from his family, doing tasks that weren't really relevant to him, things like a 6-minute walk test or a 4 stair climb. this particular trial happened to end because it lacked efficacy. It failed to meet its primary endpoint of the 4th year climb. So Mindy, I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about your clinical trial experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much to PPMD for allowing us to present the status of where we're at with what we're working on, and thanks to everybody for attending to learn more about it. So my name's Mindy Leffler. I'm going to apologize up front to all of the people that have heard my story before for the repetition, but since there's always new people to the community, I'll just start briefly from the beginning. So I'm the mom of Aiden. So the two of us here. He was diagnosed before his 3rd birthday, and he's 19 now, and he's about to start his sophomore year at the University of Washington. And he started his first trial at 8 years old, so it's been more than a decade. His childhood was essentially shaped by his clinical trial experience, and it's also had a huge impact on the rest of our family, including his siblings. And as Amber mentioned, when he first started, there was so much excitement about treatments heading to the clinic, but no one really talked very much about the patient burden and the family burden of trial participation. And so the first study that he did required us to travel from Seattle to Vancouver, Canada, every Wednesday, which we did for 2 years. My family rotated who was going to take him up there. We fortunately had some grandparents that were grateful for their willingness to take him up there as well. And because the study drug that he was in the trial for caused really prominent injection site reactions, we knew from the very first shot that we were going to spend the first year flying up there each week for him to get injected with saline. So Amber, you can go to the next slide. So this is a list of compounds that did not reach statistical significance on their primary endpoint on at least one study. And for many of these potential treatments, we don't know whether it was the study design or a lack of efficacy that caused the problem. And some of these treatments have gone on to demonstrate benefit after they've been studied further. And my son's first trial is on the list. I know Amber's is as well. And along with our families, this list really represents the hundreds of families whose children also had their childhoods shaped by clinical trial participation, who gave up, literal blood and flesh, only to emerge from that experience without definitive answers on whether the treatment was worth pursuing in a lot of these situations. And so families from our son's generation, we're the really first big clinical trial generation, our group, our cohort. And each family has its own unique, trial story. In our generation, they have their own motivation, their own goals for what they're trying to accomplish, whether it's, trying to benefit their individual child or, an altruistic, contribution to the state of science. And so what really drives us and why we wanted to open with these stories is that what drives us is making sure that those sacrifices, the sacrifices of all of these families really ends up meaning something. And so that's really the beginning of our story. You can go to the next slide. So after that first experience that my family had when my son was flying up to Canada and the trial was ended, we didn't really know for sure whether it was helpful or not. When he started his next study, we started our own kind of video capture program where we wanted to put things on video so we knew whether it was helping him or not. And we ended up capturing this little series of videos. Probably a lot of people have seen these. They've been widely circulated, but we'll play them quickly just to refresh. This is what he looked like at the start of the study. I had to boost him into the minivan, very embarrassing for a middle schooler. And then the second video is what he looked like about 5 months in. And so that's when we really started noticing that things were changing. And this last video is 9 months in. And what I love the most about that video is just how pleased he is. And what he's so pleased with essentially is really the fact that it got easier for him to move around in his daily life. And that's when we thought, I think this is what we want to try and measure, is the ease of these boys' movement. How hard is it for them to move around in their daily life? Because for us and for a lot of the families that we talk to, that's really the crux of Duchenne, is how hard is it to move around, to go about your daily life. Go ahead, next slide. Actually, let me tell this story first. When I caught those videos of Aiden and we were taking a look at how his ease of movement was being altered as a result of study participation, we actually had a group of really generous families that offered to do a little pilot study for us. In that particular study, there had been an adverse event that led to the pause of that study treatment. And so these families' sons were all coming off treatment, and a lot of them were looking really strong, in the world of Duchenne at the time that they came off treatment, and they agreed to take video as their sons were withdrawn from treatment. And what we ended up seeing was that these boys were acquiring, these compensations. Sometimes the speed of what they were doing didn't necessarily change, but they were doing it in a different way. And that's really the point at which we thought, okay, this is something that we can, turn into an outcome measure. So super grateful to those families that were willing to put that effort in amidst of what was a really difficult circumstance for them individually. So that's when we decided, okay, we're gonna turn this into an outcome measure. And so, outcome measures, they are endpoints that are necessary for research. They're a way for us to determine is something working or not, because they provide an objective measurement of changes that have occurred because of an intervention. And for us, we actually started bringing these videos into FDA and talking to FDA about them. And the reaction that we got from them was, this is a really interesting approach. You just need to make sure that it's standardized and rigorous. And they really generously gave us a grant to work with the folks at CPATH to provide us with the expertise that we needed to start putting that rigor and standardization in place. Go ahead, next slide. And so outcome measures in use at the time in Duchenne, these are listed, these have the purposes that are listed by each outcome alongside them. I think a lot of us that have boys our son's age have been through the 6-minute walk era. And I think in retrospect, we can probably say that not a lot of our boys really prioritize exercise intolerance, but the 6-minute walk was the first kind of main measure that we used in clinical trials. And I think for a lot of us, it was pretty problematic. My son would always say, why do they think I care so much about speed walking? I just want to walk, from my classroom to the cafeteria, so really more focused on functional walking, rather than, exercise-based walking. We went through, as with Amber's family, we went through the brief 4-stair climb era, taking a look at how fast the boys could climb 4 stairs. My personal experience with that one is that we went into clinic and, my son marched right up the stairs, and then he forgot to put his arms at his sides like a soldier. That's the instructions. Go to the top, put your arms at your sides like a soldier. And so, it's an outcome measure with such brief duration that's being recorded. You add a little bit of extra reaction time for the boys to kind of remember that that's how they're supposed to stop, and the watch won't stop until they assume that position. And you can understand why that was a pretty brief era in clinical trial conduct in Duchenne. And so now we're really in a lot of studies using the North Pole, and those have a lot of great data behind them, and they're looking at functional motor abilities in Duchenne, and that's in the clinic primarily, and that's really why we think the DVA can be a really nice complementary assessment to learning about these boys' ease of movement, alongside the ability to look at these functional motor abilities. Go ahead, next slide. So like I mentioned, what we're looking at is we are looking at the ease of movement instead of looking at time-based testing or endurance-based testing. And we're defining that really as the compensations that these boys acquire to complete everyday tasks. This is the kind of thing that we always talk about as parents. When you check in with another parent and you ask them how their son is doing, you tend to hear things like, okay, we upped his steroid dose, and I think it really helped because he's not pushing up his thighs when he gets off the floor anymore. Or conversely, you could be talking to a parent and they'll say, well, I think he's really starting to struggle because he was eating like this, and now I'm seeing this, supporting the other risks. And we all have seen those things, and we know those things, and we know what they mean. Sometimes they kind of make your heart sink a little bit because that means that things are getting harder for him. And so essentially what we're trying to do is take those things that we all notice as parents and quantify them in a way that's really reliable and that could be quantified in a clinical trial. So that's essentially what the Duchenne Video Assessment does. Next slide. So here's the way it works. If you are a caregiver and you're completing the Duchenne Video Assessment, you're going to download an app on your phone. If you don't have a phone, we'll give you one. You watch videos that show you how to record your own videos. Then you go ahead and record your son doing some movement activities in your home at your convenience. And then we have data monitors that check the incoming videos to make sure they're scoreable. And then when it's time to score, we have physical therapists that evaluate the videos. And the nice thing about using the video approach like this is that those physical therapists can be blinded to the time point. So they won't know, is this video capture that I'm looking at, was it done at the end of the study or the beginning of the study? So it adds a layer of rigor into the way that it's quantified. So it's been designed from the ground up to be an at-home assessment, really to look at how the boys are habitually moving in their daily lives and in their natural environment. How are they having an easier time navigating their individual environment? And like I mentioned, we're looking at those compensatory strategies. The tasks themselves were all selected because they represent a certain loss of independence for boys and families when they're unable to complete those tasks anymore. When we designed the tasks and the capture procedures, we went to families to understand, what would be meaningful loss to them and how do we design the capture procedures. Like, for example, we have one where the boys are reaching out across the table to look at their cell phone, and the boys were really clear, I want that screen down. I don't want anybody in my business, so I want it screened down so the task is actually reach out, grab the cell phone and flip it over so that they can maintain privacy with their business. And that was an example of how the capture procedures were designed with input from the boys themselves. And this is data really that can't be captured in the clinic. It's taking a look at how they perform in their daily lives, free from the fatigue of travel. I think all of us that have been in a clinical trial probably have at least one experience that they can describe that was really difficult. My son did spend the night in an airport when flights were canceled after an emergency landing the night before coming in and having his physical function assessed. So this is a way to take a look at their performance free from any of those variables and free from any medical anxiety that the boys might have due to invasive procedures. And this is the list of tasks that the boys do. You can see that it spans the entire progression of Duchenne, tasks that are aimed towards the younger, stronger boys and tasks aimed towards the boys that are at later stages of progression. So that's really the hope that we can kind of span the entire progression of Duchenne. And the goal is really to meet each kid where he's at the time of treatment administration and take a look at whether the trajectory of that boy is changing as a result of treatment. And we've always kind of noted that the first thing that tends to change in boys, when you put them on steroids or you start an interventional study that might be effective is it's very individual to the specific patient, what happens to change. So the idea is that we're trying to come up with a variety of tasks, so we have a lot of different windows into how that individual child is doing and what their current compensatory strategy is and what might change over the short term. So the analysis that we're conducting is really looking at change in an individual boy over time. So we're not comparing the severity of the placebo arm at one time point to the severity of the treated arm and then doing the same at a later point. We're looking at the rate of change in an individual boy to see if the rate of change is different between a treated arm and a placebo arm. So I'll just show you this because, like I mentioned, we all do talk about how our boys are progressing and changing as a result of treatment. And these were kind of some initial fact-finding videos that we started taking. This is my son when he was 3 months on Exondys. Oops, sorry. This is 3 months on Exondys, and so this is him getting off the floor. This is before we had standard operating procedures around our video capture, so we cut his head off a little bit. They're better quality now, but. And so you can tell he's walking his hands along the floor, he's pushing his hands off both thighs, and he has to do that little shimmy to get his torso raised because he's losing strength in his torso. But just a month later, the changes, are subtle, but they're measurable. So you can see, he still is walking his hands along the floor, but he just glances one hand off his thigh and then his torso pops right up. So those are two of the compensations on our scorecards. How many hands do they have to push off their thighs and what's their level of difficulty in raising their torso? So this is something that we can quantify, those subtle changes that happen as a result of successful treatment. Next slide. This is later on in his progression, so this will show kind of the converse to that other piece. This is him sitting up from supine. This is a task that spans a lot of boys with Duchenne, and so you can see he's turning to his side. He has to walk his hands along the floor, and then 6 months later, the additional compensation that he's added is this need to clasp his hands together to be able to drive that force through the floor to be able to get that torso lifted. So just some examples of those nuanced changes that we're quantifying in our validated scorecards. And the goal really is to take a look at, can we quantify these changes in a more interim basis? Are they sensitive enough that they're going to allow us to potentially, run shorter trials maybe and potentially have less placebo exposure for families because we can see things happening a little faster. Next slide. So this is an example from our source material study. And as you're watching this young man get off the floor, there's 2 time points. Amber, I don't know if you can play that one more time, but the first time point is at our baseline, and the next time point is 30 weeks later. And as you're watching, just kind of ask yourself, is he having an easier time, about the same level of difficulty, or harder time between those 2 time points? And most people that have watched that video, will articulate that he's having a slightly harder time. But I'll show you on the next slide the scorecards and how that can be actually quantified. So at the first time point, he is not walking his hands along the floor. At the second time point, he is walking his hands along the floor. And then he's pushing hands off both thighs at the second time point. So, that's the difference that you can see that it's quantified. And he's got a difference in severity percentage between time point 1 and time point 2 on that one. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Amber to talk about what we're hoping that we can enlist the community to help us with.
Mindy. So I'm going to talk to you about our upcoming study that we will be enrolling for soon. It's called Arise. We have really 2 main objectives that we are looking at addressing with this study. And the first one is to collect the rest of the data that is needed for the FDA and the EMA. EMA is basically FDA of Europe. In order for the Duchenne Video Assessment to become a qualified outcome assessment. And so basically what that means to be a qualified outcome assessment is that regulatory agencies recognize it, that it is an outcome measure that is well-defined and is reliable. So it measures what it says it's going to measure, and it does it consistently over time. It also represents the conclusion that we can measure our concept of interest, which Mindy described as ease of movement. What's really interesting is that there are no other outcome measures in Duchenne that are qualified outcome measures with the FDA. And so we're really, really excited to be moving in a direction to become the first qualified measure. The other part of this is that we'll be establishing a database of videos of individuals with Duchenne that really cover the entire lifespan of the disease. So from our really young guys who maybe you're not even seeing compensations in, up to some of our older guys who, doing a lot of like arm function tasks related to the hands. So it'll be a great opportunity to have this database of videos collected.
So we've got a lot of preliminary data that shows us that, we have good agreement between different physical therapists that are using our scorecards to score the same videos. So we had a group of PTs that scored our videos, and they did agree with each other on what those scores would be at a level that we were really excited about. We also had some of those same physical therapists come back and score the same videos a month later, and they agreed with their initial assessment in a way that at a level that we were excited about. So we have some really good preliminary data that this can be done reliably, and that it can be that it is measuring exactly what we're hoping that it will measure. So we've got just a couple of outstanding data points that we need to capture to get us across the finish line for qualification. And the first one is we're looking at how variable the boy's performance is day to day. I think as parents, we don't see a ton of variability from one day to the next unless, they've gone to SeaWorld or something, but we need to be able to prove that they're using the same compensatory strategies from one day to the next. And what that's going to help us do is say, basically, here's the amount of variability we see day to day or week to week over a short period of time. And so anything in excess of that variability could be considered a meaningful amount of change. And so that's really what we need to get us across the finish line for qualification, to be able to pinpoint what is that degree of change that we can consider meaningful, that's above and beyond just variability that you might see depending on the day that parents happen to record. And then aside from that, the FDA wants us to take a look at kind of how we move alongside outcome measures that are already in use. And so those are really the last 2 pieces of data that we need to capture to be able to submit our qualification plan to FDA. And that's what we're asking for everyone's help with.
Yeah, so what's interesting about ARISE is it will be one of the first studies that actually involves females who have been diagnosed with Duchenne, as well as ages 2 and up. So it's pretty varied population here. And our study coordinators will be guiding you through every step of the process. So they'll call you, make contact, and if there are any questions, they're always happy to answer those. So some of the things you'll be doing is collecting some videos. There'll be 6 sets of videos that are being captured over 2 years. They are functional tasks, things like walking or eating. Mindy mentioned picking up your cell phone. There are tasks like putting a t-shirt on, taking a t-shirt off. And you have a 2-week window in order to capture these videos. So really, it's an opportunity for you to find the most convenient time that works into your schedule or your son's schedule. Or if he's not feeling well one day, then you may choose to capture the next day. The videos only take about 30 minutes for the entire set. As Mindy said before, the physical therapist will rate the videos at the end of the capture. So they'll be blinded to every single time point. You'll also be asked to fill out additional questionnaires, as well as a couple of remote assessments, either the North Star and or the POLE, which is the performance of upper limb. It just really will help us to determine the DVA's sensitivity to change over time when we compare to those two. You'll also be compensated for your time. So each time point, the participant will receive a stipend for their efforts. So 2 kind of additional pieces we'll be looking to collect during this study is our performance of the scorecard. So Mindy showed you a couple of the scorecards. Each task has its own unique scorecard. We'll be taking some of the data back to just really reevaluate those and make sure that each criteria is representative of function within the entire spectrum. It'll also help us to revise our rater training program to be used in further clinical trials. So currently, we have a rater training program where physical therapists watch a series of modules. They take a test to see if they can determine scores for each of them. They have to have a certain percentage pass rate in order to be considered a certified rater for our studies. And then they repeat these trainings yearly. So, it's our desire to make sure that they're up to date constantly. They're being trained consistently with the scorecards. And so that's one of the pieces that this study will allow us to do, is to continue to refine those programs. So if you would like more information, there are a couple of ways that you can let us know that. There is an email address here, a phone number, or you can also scan the QR code below. So if you just open your phone's camera and scan that, it'll put a little link on your screen. You tap that link. It'll send you to a smart sheet where you can input your information and a study coordinator will contact you.
Well, and Amber, really quickly before we move on, I just want to emphasize, for people that are thinking through participating in this study, I mean, the key takeaways for people to note, that this is an entirely remote study. You don't have to go into clinic at all. You'll do it at home, and the videos are captured, about every 6 months. So, and it's about 30 minutes every 6 months. And then there'll be these other performance of upper limb or North Star that's done, just at baseline 12 months and 24 months. So it's pretty minimal time commitment with a huge impact to be able to take this outcome all the way through qualification. And I want to also emphasize that people can participate in this study even if they are in an existing study. So if you're in an existing study right now, or you're thinking about participating in an existing study and you might not want to take this on because you're concerned about how that will impact it, it will not impact it at all. So it's really just based on if you have the time to contribute. We would really appreciate your participation. We understand that, this remote data capture requires that we're partnering with families in a way that's a little bit different than when you bring your son to clinic to participate in a study. So we will walk everyone through it every step along the way. And like I said, it will not affect participation in any other study. So we're really just looking at that, like I mentioned, that variability, from one moment to the next. And so you'll be able to do that alongside another study if you have the time available to do it. Happy to answer any questions about the study. And we have a lot of people to thank along the way who've given us expertise on the conduct of other studies, who've provided funding, who've provided expertise on how to develop this process. So we're indebted to a large group of people for all of their assistance.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Amber. It's really important work. We definitely need better outcome measures for showing efficacy of potential therapies, whether that's getting us to answers on they're working or even, failing faster is important too. And this helps address one of those really big barriers that we always hear from families in terms of travel just being a burden. And so I think it's a great tool. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat and we'll start to get to some of those. So there was a question, are non-ambulatory patients able to participate in this study?
Absolutely.
You want to take it away too? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're looking for families all across the spectrum of Duchenne progression. So we're looking for really young guys. We're looking for non-ambulatory people and everything along the spectrum. So there's really no stage that a family could be at with their son's progression or with your own progression that would preclude you from participating. So we want to hear from everybody. We're looking for large numbers of people so that we can make sure that we're doing this in a way that's as rigorous as possible and we collect enough data from FDA. Yeah, that's a great idea. Sorry, I just saw Colin's comment. Do you want to, Amber, just scroll back up one slide so we can just leave that QR code up while we're doing the Q&A? That's a great idea. Thanks, Colin.
And we'll make sure that we post it as well when we post the video, that we have that information. But that is great that you're going for such a broad population. I know that's another one of the challenges that we always have is, to sometimes get to whether a product is providing benefit. We see with kind of the current outcome measures we have, them really narrow down the enrollment population of studies. And so, outcome measures that might be able to be used across the entire spectrum of disease would be really, really powerful.
Well, and that's actually one of the things that we're hoping to get from this data set is, to really establish empirically that, that we might have a possibility of scoring across the entire spectrum. So, are we building like separate little outcome measures for each segment of the population, but our kind of North Star that we're trying to, our holy grail that we're trying to get to is something that can be quantified across all of these tasks. And that's one of the things that we'll be able to get from this study is that feasible or not, to be able to do that? And do we have enough data that's convincing enough to regulatory?
And then I did see another question. Are participants ex-US, so outside of the US, able to participate in this study, or is it just within at the moment?
Yeah, just based on the regulatory rules around data collection outside of the U.S., we are conducting this study with the U.S. Central IRB approval. And if we, depending on recruitment, we may go outside the U.S., but according to kind of the regulatory procedures, we would have to go for local IRB approval in every location where somebody wants to participate from outside the U.S. So right now it's U.S. Canada, but we may open that up at a later date. If we need to. It's a really burdensome or really kind of long and difficult approval process with the local ethics committees. So agree.
Yeah, no, we see those challenges within some of the scientific consortium in the space, where kind of dealing with some of the EU and some of the other areas with their regulations can make it a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I would love to see that change in the future, just because I think for rare disease research, I hope, especially with remotely conducted data capture, it just makes it prohibitively difficult to kind of go where the patients are and seek approvals in all of those locations. I really hope that Essential will cover that at some point in the future. That's my little soapbox. Sorry, Eric.
No, that's okay. And then another question kind of about around inclusion. Is there any restriction in terms of if boys have autism or any kind of intellectual delays that would preclude them from being able to participate?
Yeah, Amber, do you want to take that? I'm happy to.
Yeah, no, there are not, because like Mindy said, we're looking at each individual and kind of what their trajectory is. It makes it unique that we can include boys that are maybe on the spectrum. So we're comparing them to themselves at each time point.
Well, and that's actually one of the reasons why we took this approach, to develop something that was entirely home-based. I think a lot of families, that are in that category, it's hard to go into clinic and it's hard to go to an unfamiliar environment and be assessed. And so having families be able to do this at home, hopefully will, expand the ease of participation for families that are kind of on the spectrum, just to be able to keep the boys in an environment that they're comfortable with. So really, essentially, as long as he can sit on the floor and you can say, when I say go stand up, and he can stand up, then we'd love to have you.
I think Mindy's saying he here, but keep in mind that boys and girls are welcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Amber. I appreciate that. Yeah, we are. I saw some comments. I know I saw some comments about that were including females. Yeah, we want to start collecting some natural history data on girls affected by Duchenne, and so we're including females for participation in the study as well. We want to start learning more about that population that's really been understudied.
And then we had another question, because I'm sure this is probably not as familiar for a lot of folks in the community, with kind of the drug development tool qualification pathway with FDA. So in terms of timeline, so after including kind of the trial with ARISE, what does your timeline kind of look like for qualification process? And do you see this as something that would end up as or hopefully be positioned as a primary endpoint, or would it be more supportive in clinical trials?
That's a great question. So the timeline, we're planning on submitting our qualification plan in the next coming months. So this fall, we'll be ready to submit for qualification. So, and I see the benefit for qualification is twofold. There's the eventual outcome of being a qualified measure, that kind of streamlines those conversations that the drug companies have with FDA. But in addition, there's benefit along the way to us, because what it does is it opens up conversation between us and FDA about how we're doing things. Could we be doing them better? Should we alter the way that we're analyzing this data? We get to open up that dialogue once that it's been open all along, but it will really, we'll have a lot of opportunities to engage in that dialogue once we submit that qualification plan. And so that will allow us to really vet this, the ins and outs and the really finite details of this approach with FDA. And that conversation will start as soon as we submit our qualification plan this fall, because they'll be trying to duplicate all the analyses that we've done. They'll be vetting our future planned analyses and helping us, get those to be as rigorous as possible. So, there'll be benefit, along the way, even prior to actual qualification. So, but what we're really, and then we'll get some more guideline from FDA about the timing of when the actual qualification could potentially be granted if everything looks the way that we want it to. But like I mentioned, that main piece we'll get at the baseline capture, because families that'll participate will take 1-2 sets of videos kind of in the beginning that'll get us that variability that I was talking about. And so that data will be available really as soon as we're able to get recruited and get everybody through their first capture. And then that second piece, to look at how we're moving alongside the North Star and the POL, that will come at 12 months. And then we'll be able to submit full qualification data at that point. But my understanding is we'll probably be submitting this data in a rolling fashion alongside that dialogue with FDA.
That's really helpful context.
And
then I know you mentioned this.
Sorry, I was just going to address the other piece of that. You asked about whether we were considered exploratory or secondary primary endpoint.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and we've been included in a number of studies as an exploratory endpoint, and we actually have a study that will be included in as a secondary endpoint soon. But I think ultimately the goal would be to become a primary endpoint at some point when we get there.
Oh, that's great. And then I know you mentioned this during the talk, but we did have a question about reaching out to communities that maybe don't have access to smartphones. And I guess two things is one, is it kind of any smartphone device this works for? And then I believe you said as well that for the study, you would be able to provide a device if a family doesn't have one.
Yeah. There's kind of a minimum compatibility of smartphones that work with the app. It's really just, is your phone, it doesn't have to be brand new by any means. I have an old one and it still works with mine, but it's really just how far back does your phone go to make sure that it's compliant with the app. And yes, we will provide phones to families that aren't able to have one or don't have one or choose not to use theirs. So. And then reaching out to, I saw a couple questions about reaching out to communities. We'd be thrilled for any assistance in that and happy to take it and and people can contact us for ways in which we can start doing that.
And then I guess this might be something that comes up. I didn't see it as a question there, but anytime there's kind of, video of families taking them of their children, I'm sure there's questions around protection and kind of how that works as you kind of create the database. Could you just kind of talk through what that process is? And I know when you showed some of the videos earlier, there was some blurring of the faces as well, just for in case anyone has that kind of concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are really we have a whole quality and compliance team that makes sure that we're keeping to those rules. But as somebody whose family who has been rather public over the years, it's something that's really a priority for me and then for us at Casimir, to make sure that families are protected that choose to make this contribution to the community. So we have privacy protections in place. The only people that will see these videos in an unbroke fashion are our data monitors, that watch the videos when they come in. Before the physical therapists rate them, they're all blurred, and nothing is outside of really strict password protected controls. So we have before we can submit to the ethics board, we have to have all of that in place, and have proper controls in place. But yeah, and the consent form will tell people exactly what the data will be used for, in what form it'll be used. So.
Okay. And then again, I just wanted to, ask again to reiterate this point, because I think it's a really key one when we're looking at trials like this, where, families see 2 years, and we often have a lot of them that are looking for other trials, or they're waiting to get into them. But you did say that being in a trial with an investigational product would not prohibit someone from being able to participate in this trial, correct?
Yeah, not at all. Anybody who's in an interventional study or doing a study right now can go ahead and sign up and participate, and as soon as we start recruiting. And even if you're thinking or you're waiting for a study, you can go ahead and get started with this right away, and then you can go ahead and start that interventional study when you're ready to. It will not affect your participation in any other studies at all.
Yeah, and later if you decide to join in on another study, you can continue this study. So.
No, that's really helpful.
Have to drop, yeah.
We've seen that from some of the questions we've done with participants at our annual conference. That's always one of the hesitations with natural history studies, but so that's good to see that it wouldn't stop them from being able to pursue that. And then just the last two. So around, how many participants are you looking for the ARISE study?
Yeah, I think our goal is around 150.
Okay.
So 20 to 25 in each of our sort of subgroups that we've identified.
And then the last one is kind of the expectation on when the trial will be able to begin enrolling patients.
Yeah, so our hope is that will happen pretty early this fall. So it's very soon. We're waiting on some final documentation from one of our grant sources, but then we should be ready to go within the next month or so. But definitely in the meantime, if you want more information, or you can go ahead and give us an email or a call, put your name and information in that smart sheet that's accessed by the QR code, and a study coordinator will call you and sort of get you set up.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. And then one final question: is there any way that the community can help you with the regulatory process, or is it just participating?
Yeah, that's why I love this community. Everybody is so eager to help out. And so I think when we start engaging, yeah, for sure participating, telling everyone else to participate. 150 people is a lot of people, and we're going to try and recruit them as quickly as we can, because I think all of us, who are in this community understand the urgency that we're facing. So, yeah, spread the word, participate yourself. And then as we start engaging with FDA, it's great to know that there's willingness to help participate on that front. I think we feel pretty comfortable about the approach that we're taking, and now we just need to make sure that we've got the data to back up the fact that it can be done in a rigorous and reliable way. So, but there may be opportunities to participate in the future, and to make sure that we've got the patient preference side covered. So we'll definitely be reaching out on that front too. And then I did notice somebody asked about plans to make the outcome measure recognized by payers. So I just wanted to address that piece. Just for me personally, when eteplirsen was approved, I actually got a denial from my payer and was able to get those videos that we showed at the beginning of my son getting in the minivan to my payer, and they overturned that denial without even having to engage in the appeal process. So there's precedent for that, and that's something we're actually just starting to reach out to payers about, because we think that it can be a way to do long-term monitoring for patients, potentially even post-approval, because it's tough to bring your family into clinic, time and time again. And especially if the child's doing well, you're even less incentivized to want to keep going back to clinic if you've received a successful treatment. So our thoughts are that this might be a way to be able to keep an eye on how the boys are doing without requiring them to come to clinic at all. And also without requiring them to, make any appointments with anyone. This is just something that they could do on their own time when it's convenient for them. So absolutely, we do have plans for that. So I just wanted to address that question also.
Yeah, that would be a big help. All right. I think that's the end of the questions that I see. So I just want to say thank you both, Mindy and Amber, for sharing today. Hopefully we can, maybe do another webinar in the future, check back in on the study and see, what you've all been learning. As a reminder to everyone, this is being recorded, so please feel free to share with your friends and families, and we'll make sure that we have all of the contact information on our website when we post the recording as well. So that way you can all find that, so you can talk to the study coordinators if you want to participate. So thank you both.
Thanks so much. Yeah, sorry, Eric, just thanks so much to you and Stephanie for doing this and for allowing us the time to talk to everyone. And really appreciate all the comments that people had about how they can help recruit. We will take all the help we can get. So we really appreciate that very much.
Thanks, everyone.